You will fail, human. The word slithered through the air like a slow-moving toxin, laced with certainty and just a hint of condescension. Ethan Carter didn't react. He simply adjusted his seat, leaned back, and offered the alien beside him the same amused smirk he had given every other doubtful stare in the room. The Grand Lecture Hall of the Intergalactic Academy of Higher Knowledge was an architectural marvel, a spiraling amphitheater built to accommodate the diverse biological needs of the galaxy's greatest minds. Hundreds of students filled the chamber, sentient crystalline clusters hovering over seats, gelatinous scholars pulsing with neural activity, and insectoid creatures chittering in their multitonal languages. Ethan was the only human among them, and that made him an anomaly. A problem to be solved. Professor Zilvath, a towering cephalopod-like being draped in dark ceremonial robes, loomed at the center of the chamber. 6 luminous eyes scanned the room before settling briefly on Ethan. As this is the first day of the new term, the professor began, I will assess your intellectual readiness with a problem set designed to test abstract reasoning, multi-layered logic, and temporal pattern recognition. Ethan could feel the anticipation thick in the air. It was a test, a way to separate the truly gifted from the merely competent. A full week will be given to complete the assignment. Those who fail to meet expectations will be reassigned to remedial study. There was a murmur of acknowledgement from the students. Ethan crossed his arms, waiting. With a flick of Zilvatha's appendage, a holographic equation burst into view above every student's desk. Complex, sprawling, multidimensional logic structures weaved into a nightmare of shifting variables and temporal instability. The equation seemed alive, its components mutating in real time, making conventional computation impossible. Ethan heard a few students clicking neural enhancers onto their skulls, others activating biosymbiotic calculators embedded in their forearms. Tools of the galaxy's best and brightest, tools they assumed they needed. Ethan didn't move. He studied the problem for exactly 20 seconds. Then he cracked his knuckles, exhaled, and began writing. The moment Ethan submitted his answer, 10 minutes later, silence crushed the hall. Professor Zilvath, who had been engaged in conversation with another student, turned slowly. You are finished? Ethan nodded, stretching his arms. Yep. Zilvatha's body language shifted slightly. You understand this assignment was designed for an estimated 60 to 80 hours of advanced computation? Yeah, Ethan said, nodding. That's why I kept it simple. Murmurs rippled across the room. Some students turned to look at his console, expecting to see a joke submission, randomized data, meaningless input, a desperate ploy for attention. Instead, they saw perfectly structured logic trees, refined calculations, and a streamlined, elegant solution that bypassed the assignment's intended complexity entirely. The equation had been solved in a way no one had considered. Zilvatha's luminous eyes narrowed as he analyzed Ethan's work. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The professor ran the numbers through a validation sequence, twice. The answer remained undeniably, irrefutably correct. This. Zilvatha's tendrils coiled as he glanced at Ethan. This is impossible. Not really, Ethan said, tilting his head. I just thought about it differently. At that moment, every alien in the hall realized something unsettling. Humans didn't just learn. They understood. A notification flashed across Ethan's console, a summons from the Academy's High Chancellor. He had been noticed. The silence in the Grand Lecture Hall was suffocating. Ethan Carter leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, watching the towering form of Professor Zilvath as the alien's tendrils hovered over the holographic console. 6 luminous eyes scanned and rescanned the solution Ethan had submitted, every sequence, every calculation, perfect. It had been 10 minutes. The assignment was designed to take a full week. Somewhere in the background, hushed whispers grew louder. Ethan felt every gaze in the room fixate on him. That's not possible, someone muttered. He cheated, another voice snapped, a reptilian scholar, her frilled crest flaring in agitation. Did he use an unauthorized neural processor? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. He'd seen this before, the disbelief, the immediate denial. People didn't like it when you broke their expectations. Zilvath finally spoke. His deep, resonant voice betrayed the first hints of uncertainty. "Student Carter," he said slowly, "can you explain your solution?" Ethan shrugged. "Sure. You set up the problem using a tiered logic construct, assuming it needed a brute force approach. But that's inefficient. Once I recognized that the shifting variables followed a predictable cycle, I reduced the entire set to a single recursive function. After that, it was just a matter of plugging in the constants and letting the pattern resolve itself." The room was silent again. Zilvath's tendrils twitched. "A recursive collapse function," he repeated, as if testing the words. Ethan nodded. "Yeah. Your problem wasn't hard. It was just messy. Took me about 20 seconds to spot the flaw, and the rest was just cleanup." A stunned murmur spread through the students. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with thinly veiled hostility. "You're lying," someone snapped. Ethan turned to see Vorik, a hulking, four-armed Saurian student glaring at him. "There's no way a human could have solved this faster than a unified neural matrix." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And yet, here we are." Vorik's scaled lips curled back, but before he could respond, Zilvath interrupted. "Enough." A soft chime echoed through the hall as the professor initiated a full verification scan. The Academy's quantum computing system processed Ethan's work at speeds far beyond any biological mind. It only took 3 seconds. "Solution confirmed." The words materialized above Zilvath's terminal in glowing red-gold text. The tension in the room solidified into something heavier. Disbelief turned to unease. Zilvath regarded Ethan carefully. "Do you realize what you have done?" Ethan smirked. "Solved a math problem?" The professor's tendrils curled inward, an alien expression Ethan couldn't quite read. "You have displayed an understanding of logic processing that surpasses even some of our most advanced artificial intelligences. This is unexpected." Vorik scoffed. "If he's so smart, let's see him do it again." Zilvath considered this. Then, with a flick of his appendage, a second problem appeared, 3 times more complex than the first. Ethan glanced at it. He picked up his stylus. The scratching of digital ink lasted 5 minutes. When Ethan submitted his work a second time, the room didn't even bother waiting for verification. They already knew. Zilvath didn't speak. He simply tapped a command on his interface. A notification flashed across Ethan's console. Summons, High Chancellor's Office. Reason, immediate inquiry. Ethan exhaled. Well, that didn't take long. Around him, the students whispered. He caught fragments of conversation. Humans aren't supposed to be this fast. Did we miscalculate their cognitive potential? If this is what they're capable of now, what will they be in 100 years? For the first time, Ethan saw something in their expressions that wasn't just curiosity. It was fear. As Ethan rose from his seat, heading toward the Chancellor's chambers, he caught a figure watching him from the upper balcony, not a student, not a professor. A high-ranking official. Someone had been expecting this. The High Chancellor's office was silent, vast, and cold. Ethan Carter stood at the center of the domed chamber, facing a semicircle of alien scholars, administrators, and intelligence officers. The architecture of the room, black stone walls with shifting silver inscriptions, radiated a quiet authority. This was the heart of the Academy's ruling body. At the head of the panel sat High Chancellor Orvek, a towering, multi-limbed being with an exoskeleton of polished obsidian. His 6 primary eyes studied Ethan with clinical detachment, while his secondary set of vestigial sensory nodes pulsed faintly, monitoring Ethan's physiological responses. Professor Zilvath stood beside him, his cephalopodic features tense with something approaching unease. The silence stretched. Ethan didn't break it. It was a power game. They want me to feel small. Uncertain. So, he waited. Finally, Orvek spoke, his voice a deep, multitonal resonance that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. Human Ethan Carter, we are here to discuss your performance. Ethan tilted his head. I didn't realize doing well in class warranted a tribunal. A few members of the panel exchanged glances, some annoyed, others intrigued. It is not merely that you did well, Zilvath interjected. It is that you performed an intellectual feat previously thought impossible. Orvek leaned forward, steepling his clawed fingers. Your species is new to the Academy. We have studied humans, assessed your neurological structures, tested your biological limits. He paused. Yet, your demonstration to date suggests a fundamental miscalculation. Ethan crossed his arms. What exactly is the problem? A smaller, insectoid administrator chirped, her mandibles clicking. The problem, human, is that you completed a 7-day assignment in 10 minutes. Then, when given a problem exponentially more difficult, you completed it in 5. Orvek gestured, and a holographic display materialized, Ethan's brain scan. Neural pathways lit up like a fractal explosion, shifting dynamically even as the image remained frozen. Your cognitive efficiency is anomalous, Orvek said. Human brains, as we understood them, were comparable to many mid-tier sentient species, adaptive, certainly, but not extraordinary. Ethan frowned. And now? A deep mechanical voice echoed from the side of the room. Now, we must consider that humans may be far more dangerous than previously assumed. Ethan turned toward the speaker, a synthetic intelligence housed in a floating obelisk of dark metal. One of the Academy's axiom constructs, responsible for maintaining the institution's intellectual security. Define dangerous, Ethan said carefully. The construct's voice remained coldly neutral. Dangerous, as in, if your species continues to develop at this rate, you will surpass even the most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy within a few centuries. The room went silent. Ethan blinked. Wait, what? Orvek's gaze remained locked onto him. We are considering the possibility that humans do not merely learn quickly, but that you process and adapt to new information at a rate vastly exceeding what is biologically typical. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. So, let me get this straight. Because I solved some math problems quickly, you think humanity is an existential threat? Zilvath shifted uncomfortably. It is not just that you solved them quickly. It is how you solved them. No species in this academy, even those with multi-layered consciousness, approached the problem the way you did. Ethan's brow furrowed. Maybe you guys are just overcomplicating things. A low ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. The construct hummed. Perhaps. Or perhaps your species possesses a cognitive trait we do not yet understand. Orvek leaned back. We have 3 options before us. The first, we dismiss this as a statistical anomaly and allow you to continue your studies. Ethan relaxed slightly. That sounded reasonable. The second, Orvek continued, we limit your access to higher-level coursework and ensure your intellectual development is managed. Ethan's stomach turned. Managed? And the third, the Chancellor's tone darkened, we consider the implications of your potential long-term threat to galactic stability. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through Ethan's veins. That sounded dangerously close to suggesting something permanent. Zilvath cleared his throat, sensing the tension. We are not making any rash decisions. However, you must understand, Ethan, that we are stepping into uncharted territory. Ethan exhaled. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Finally, he met Orvek's gaze. You want to know why I think differently? He asked. Orvek nodded once. Ethan smirked. All right. Give me your hardest theoretical challenge. I'll solve it right now. Murmurs erupted across the room. Orvek's expression remained unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Very well, human. Let us see what your mind is truly capable of. A new, unsolvable equation appeared before Ethan. A problem no species had ever cracked in 1,000 years. And Ethan? He just smiled. The equation hovered in the air before Ethan, a cascading labyrinth of shifting logic constructs, non-Euclidean geometries, and quantum uncertainties. It was impossible. At least, that was what they thought. High Chancellor Orvech and the panel of alien scholars watched without speaking, without blinking. The floating axiom construct processed terabytes of data in real time, monitoring every flicker of Ethan's neural activity. No species had ever solved this equation. Not in 1,000 years. And yet, Ethan Carter smiled. Not because it was easy, because it wasn't. Not because he had some secret knowledge, because he didn't. No, he smiled because the solution wasn't in raw computation. It was in seeing what no one else saw. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his knuckles, and began writing. The chamber was silent except for the faint hum of holographic light as Ethan's stylus danced across the digital interface. He didn't use brute force. Didn't approach the problem the way the galaxy's greatest minds had before him. Instead, he searched for patterns. It was instinctual, like recognizing a predator in the wild, like finding the weak spot in armor. The others had treated this problem as static, rigid, an unmovable wall. Ethan saw fluidity. The numbers weren't obstacles. They were currents. Time passed, 5 minutes. Orvech's claws flexed, the first sign of tension. The insectoid administrator leaned forward, mandibles clicking. The axiom construct pulsed, scanning Ethan's cerebral activity. Then Ethan stopped. And he smirked. "There," he said. "That should do it." The verification sequence initiated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, red warning lights flashed across the holographic displays. System error. Undefined solution state. Professor Zilvath inhaled sharply, his tendrils curling. What did you do?" Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "I solved it. Just not the way you expected." The construct's voice cut through the tension. "Explain." Ethan pointed to the equation, now locked in a paradoxical feedback loop. "The reason no one could solve this problem for 1,000 years is because you designed it wrong. It's not an equation. It's a question that assumes the wrong answer from the start." Orvech's secondary eyes flared. "That is, not possible." Ethan shrugged. "Yeah? Tell that to the system error." The verification scan ran again. Failed. Again. Failed. For the first time in Academy history, the problem had not been solved, it had been broken. And that's when Ethan saw it. The fear. Not in their words. Not in their expressions. But in the way they stared at him. They hadn't expected him to fail. They had expected him to win, just not like this. The axiom construct hummed. "This result is unprecedented." Orvech leaned forward, his voice low. "Human. Do you understand what this means?" Ethan tapped his fingers against the desk. "Yeah. It means you guys don't actually know as much as you think you do." The chamber was dead silent. Orvech's exoskeletal fingers twitched. "Your species has existed in the galactic community for less than a century. You were assumed to be primitive, intellectually average at best." Ethan arched a brow. "And now?" Orvech's gaze darkened. "Now, we must consider the implications." Ethan had seen this look before. Not on an alien face, but back on Earth, military officials, corporate executives, people with power realizing, for the first time, that they weren't the smartest person in the room. Zilvath finally broke the silence. His voice was slow, deliberate. "You did not merely solve the equation," he said. "You exposed a flaw in how we think." Ethan's smirk faded. "Because that was dangerous." A private channel opened between Orvech and the construct. Ethan couldn't hear it, but he saw the subtle flicker of data transferring. They were making a decision. About him. "Human Ethan Carter," Orvech finally said. "You are to be placed under restricted intellectual oversight until further notice." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" Zilvath exhaled. Meaning you will continue your studies, but your access to higher-level knowledge will be controlled. Ethan's jaw clenched. Because I'm too good at math? No, Orvek said softly. Because your mind does not just learn. It changes the game. And that is something we must control. Ethan sat back, exhaling through his nose. He could push back. Argue. Fight this. But not here. Not yet. So instead, he gave a slow, knowing smile. Understood, Chancellor. Orvek nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. As Ethan turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of something else. A figure in the shadows. Watching. Not a professor. Not an administrator. Someone else. And for the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't the only one playing the game. As Ethan stepped into the corridor, his communicator buzzed. A private, encrypted message. Unknown sender, they fear you. But I don't. Meet me in sublevel theta. Midnight. Ethan stared at the message, pulse steady. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The halls of the Intergalactic Academy were silent at midnight. Ethan Carter moved carefully, his footsteps light against the polished metal floors. The message on his communicator still pulsed faintly, an invitation, a challenge, or possibly a trap. They fear you. But I don't. Meet me in sublevel theta. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. No one sent encrypted messages lightly in a place like this. And yet, here he was. Because if there was one thing Ethan had learned today, it was that the Academy wasn't telling him everything. And he hated being kept in the dark. Sublevel Theta wasn't on any public directory. Ethan had to bypass 3 restricted security zones, slipping past auto-sentries and silent drone patrols. If he hadn't memorized the Academy's infrastructure blueprints before arriving, he would have never found the access hatch. The meeting place was a dimly lit data vault, its walls lined with ancient, pulsing servers, storing classified knowledge no student was supposed to see. And standing at the center of the room, arms folded, was his contact. A tall, gray-skinned alien with piercing gold eyes and a body wrapped in a dark tactical cloak. Not a student. Not an administrator. An operative. You're late, the alien said, voice smooth but sharp. Ethan smirked. I was making sure I wasn't about to walk into an execution chamber. The alien's lips twitched. Clever. He stepped forward. My name is Cale Varen. I am, let's call me an independent observer. And you, Ethan Carter, have caught the attention of people who would rather you remain controlled. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What do you want? Cale reached into his cloak and pulled out a data chip. The truth about your species. Ethan hesitated. Meaning? Cale tilted his head. The Academy told you that humanity was assumed to be average. That your cognitive limits were well documented. But what if I told you that was a lie? Ethan's fingers curled into a fist. Go on. Cale stepped closer. The Academy didn't just underestimate human intelligence. They actively suppressed the real findings. Ethan's pulse spiked. Why? Cale's gold eyes locked onto his. Because humanity is not just highly intelligent. You are something far worse. Ethan exhaled. Worse how? Cale handed him the data chip. Look for yourself. Ethan inserted the chip into his personal terminal, scanning the files at rapid speed. What he found stopped him cold. Human cognitive development studies, classified at the highest level. Analysis of brain scans across multiple species. Projected intellectual growth models. The conclusions? Humans do not merely learn. Humans adapt faster than any known species. The reason Ethan had solved those equations so quickly? It wasn't just intelligence. It was something deeper. More fundamental. Where other species had linear intellectual growth, humanity's thought patterns evolved in real time. A human facing an unfamiliar problem didn't just calculate solutions. They rewired their own cognitive pathways to overcome it. They don't just think fast. They change. And the most terrifying part? The more pressure applied, the faster humans evolved. Ethan leaned back, exhaling sharply. This is why they're afraid. Cale nodded. Yes. The Academy realized something a long time ago. Given enough time and exposure, humanity wouldn't just compete with the galaxy's greatest minds. Ethan looked up, eyes sharp. We'd surpass them. Cale's expression darkened. Exactly. And the worst part? The more they try to hold you back, the faster you'll break through their barriers. You are a species that becomes stronger under pressure. Ethan clenched his jaw. It all made sense now. Why the Chancellor had reacted the way he did. Why they had restricted his access instead of celebrating his intellect. They weren't training him. They were containing him. And they had already decided what to do next. They're going to put heavier restrictions on me, Ethan murmured. Maybe even cut me off entirely. Cale nodded. That's why I'm here. There are those of us who believe that your people should be allowed to evolve freely. Ethan studied him. Who's US? Cale smirked. Let's just say, not everyone in the galaxy fears what humanity is becoming. Some of us want to help. Ethan tapped his fingers against the terminal. And what do you expect in return? Cale's smirk widened. Oh, nothing much. Just that when the time comes, you remember who gave you this knowledge. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan nodded. Deal. Cale turned to leave, but he hesitated at the doorway. Oh, and Ethan? Yeah? Cale's gold eyes glowed faintly. The Academy isn't the only one watching you. Be careful. Then he was gone. Ethan sat back, exhaling. The truth changed everything. If humanity was truly what this data suggested, the galaxy had no idea what was coming. And neither did Ethan. Because if this was just the beginning, then he was going to break more than just their equations. He was going to break the entire system. Ethan Carter sat alone in his dormitory, staring at the glowing interface before him. The data Cale had given him still pulsed on his screen, proof that the Academy had been lying about humanity's capabilities. Proof that he wasn't just an outlier, but the first real test case of what humans were truly capable of. He should have felt angry. Instead, he felt focused. Because now, he knew exactly what was coming next. A final test. A move to decide his fate, and by extension, the fate of humanity itself. And when it came, he would be ready. The message came just before dawn. High Chancellor Orvek requests your presence in the Grand Chamber. Immediate compliance required. Ethan didn't hesitate. The moment he stepped into the chamber, he saw it. Not a hearing. Not an evaluation. A trial. Rows of alien scholars, administrators, and intelligence officials sat in strict, watchful silence. The Axiom construct hovered at the Chancellor's side, processing data in real time. At the center of the room, floating above the polished floor, was a single equation. It was massive. It pulsed with layers of complexity that defied even his own accelerated thought process. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a test. It was a message. If you solve this, we will no longer underestimate you. If you fail, we will decide how to contain you. Orvek steepled his claws. Ethan Carter. This is the most complex theoretical problem in our archives. No mind has cracked it in over 5,000 years. Ethan tilted his head. And you want me to try? The Chancellor's expression was unreadable. We want to know if you are a genius or a threat. The room was silent. Then, Ethan smiled. All right, he said. Let's play. The moment Ethan sat down at the interface, the problem consumed him. It wasn't just difficult. It was designed to break the mind that tried to solve it. Layers upon layers of recursive complexity. Equations that shifted based on their own outputs. It required more than logic. It required intuition, creativity, and something beyond raw intellect. Ethan understood immediately. This wasn't just math. It was a test of evolution. And humanity? Humanity didn't just solve problems. They adapted to them. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The observers whispered among themselves, watching Ethan work. Orvek's claws tightened. Zilvatha's tendrils twitched. The Axiom construct ran prediction models, none accounted for what Ethan was doing. Because he wasn't just solving the problem. He was rewriting it. The room fell silent as the final equation shifted. Numbers collapsed into a singular, elegant solution. A solution no artificial intelligence, no alien mind, had ever conceived. The verification scan initiated. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then. Solution confirmed. The moment the confirmation flashed across the display, the chamber erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. Some stared in horror, others in awe. Orvek slowly rose to his feet. This is. He hesitated, as if the words were difficult to form. This is unprecedented. The Axiom construct's voice was cold, precise. Human cognitive modeling is now classified as a type omega phenomenon. Immediate reassessment of human potential required. Ethan stood, stretching his arms. So, what now? Orvek met his gaze. Now? Now, the galaxy must decide what to do about your kind. Ethan smirked. Good luck with that. As Ethan left the chamber, his communicator buzzed again. Unknown sender, you just changed everything. Keep moving. We'll be in touch. Ethan exhaled, heart steady. He had come to the academy to prove himself. Instead, he had shattered the galaxy's expectations. And this was only the beginning.